Hello and welcome to this very special Facebook Live here in Delhi. We're delighted to be talking today about how to make climate action count, and in particular, how to make sure that the concerns of women are taken on board. We're actually joined by an all-women panel, which I'm delighted to see, and I'm going to introduce you to them all. Remember, those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, you can send your questions, and we'll get to them in a moment. But first of all, let me introduce Aarti Aggarwal, who is a journalist and social worker, and also works as a consultant for the Indian Election Commission. We have Maria Shaw-Barragan, who comes from the European Investment Bank. I have to declare the interest that I also come from that bank, but I will not give her an easy ride, I promise you. Maria, you look after the lending for India, for Asia, and for Latin America as well. Mohua Mukherjee, you are formerly of the World Bank, but actually now you are the program ambassador for the International Solar Alliance. And of course, that is having its first summit here in Delhi this week, so we'll hear a little bit more about that. Wonderful. And of course, that is the alliance, which is the brainchild of Mr. Modi and Monsieur Macron in France. Now, Aparna Roy, very nice to see you. You're coming from the Observatory Research Foundation, and you've been working on some of the issues where gender and climate intersect. We'll hear a bit more from you in a moment. And Suchi, you're from the Worldwide Fund for Nature, from the India office, where you particularly work on climate and cities, and that's an important issue that we'll come back to. But first of all, let me ask you, let's get down to the main issue, which is to ask, how are women and climate linked? What is the effect on women of climate change? Mohua, let me ask you to answer that first.
Because in, I think, every society, women are the ones who take care of a huge number of tasks that actually require energy, starting from arranging lighting in the house, cooking, finding water, finding wood. I'm talking about rural women who, when these resources are dwindling and disappearing, they just have a much harder time. So the men leave when this climate disaster happens and there's no work, and the women are left to cope and look after the families, elderly, children, everybody, with no resources.
And is that something we see, Aarti, happening in India, that climate change is affecting women disproportionately?
Absolutely, Shirin. I think it's worldwide. There was a study also where it was seen that of all the people displaced, 80% were women. Because of climate change, they were the ones that were affected the most. I see women not as a sole entity, but a representation of her children, her land, her agriculture, her animals, everything around the relations. A woman will never walk out like that, When there's a climate change, the food becomes scarce. There's no income, there's no agriculture, and the food prices also become higher. So the food is not accessible to the women and the girls in the family. So their health gets affected. And moreover, the women are not a part of the decision-making process, It's the men who are making the decision to the access to the resources and the agriculture. So it is more and more difficult for women, So they are the most vulnerable here.
Do we have a similar picture in cities, Suchi? Because we see, I know that you're working on cities, particularly Indian cities are a whole different challenge. But what about the way in which women living in Indian cities are affected by climate change? And also the lack of access to energy, because that's part of the issue here, isn't it?
Right, so definitely I think in cities also women are majorly affected by climate change. By the way the cities are developing, by the infrastructure development. And I'll take a very simple example that women in households would mostly walk or take the public transport. And if the infrastructure in the city is not conducive to that, it affects the safety, they cannot take the public transport, perhaps they are not driving as much. So it becomes very important for how cities are growing, for how cities are developing in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of providing different kinds of energy access and other opportunities. It is very important for women. Also energy access, as Mohua also mentioned, in the rural areas, the women are responsible for collecting fuel wood, they are responsible for running the household, they are responsible for managing the children, and out of that they also need time for their own productive use activities like simple things like stitching and others. If they do not have access to electricity, if there is no access to basic electricity, then they definitely lose out on a lot.
Maria, can I turn to you and ask you, You are in charge, partly, along with colleagues also who are sitting in the audience, of deciding what kinds of projects need to be financed, should be financed by the European Investment Bank. You're in Delhi this week, as we've said, for the Solar Alliance Summit. But how do you make sure, as a multilateral financier, that gender, that women, the vulnerabilities that we've all been talking about are taken into account?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we're hearing today here is very much the experience that we're having in each one of the regions that are covered by the European Investment Bank. So what we decided was to put in place a framework to look into the gender aspects of the projects in which we are financing. And this is our gender strategy.
Okay, we're dealing with a discotheque next to us at the moment, but as we are flexible women here up on the stage, used to dealing with whatever comes our way, we shall carry on. But just to say to you, those of you who are listening, it's just a little discotheque next door, don't panic.
Yes. Otherwise, I'll speak to the rhythm.
Yeah.
You know? We can do that. I can do that as well. So we've put in place this framework, which is our gender strategy. It is about mainstreaming the analysis of how the projects are affecting women and girls, and also about making sure that they are duly protected and that we are including their points of view into the design of the projects. So this gender strategy has 3 layers. The first one is about protect. Can we make sure that the projects that we are financing are every time looking into how they are affecting the livelihoods and the way of living of the women? That's one area. The second area is about impact. So what can we do about improving those projects so that the impact is favorable to women and contributes to the empowerment of women? And the third layer is about invest. So how can we support and invest in women entrepreneurs, in making sure that women have access to education and that they can be productive in the economy? These 3 layers, every time we look into.
And that is the theory, of course. What we'll be discussing in a moment is how do you put it into practice, which is always the hard part. Aparna, let me ask you, from your point of view, and you've done some studies around this sort of area, why do you think gender is an issue when it comes to climate policy?
Gender is an issue when it comes to climate policy and finance because of 2 questions. One, the effect of climate change that disproportionately affects women and the marginalized community. And second, the effectiveness and efficiency of a climate action project. For my first question, we are already talking about how does climate change affect women more than men. To add to this, the examples that we are quoting, I would another example is when climate change threatens the livelihood and of people and the income gets reduced. Girls are the first one who are dropped out of the school and they don't receive education. And as Aarti, Mohua and Suchismita have been talking about. In terms of efficiency and effectiveness of a climate action project, women are at the forefront of decision making. Women make decisions that affect everyday life of their family, that affect the livelihood of their families, community, shape the environment and influence the carbon emissions. Simple things from everyday life like replanting trees, using clean stoves, clean fuels for cooking, etc. By these things, they are not always vulnerable, but at the front line of addressing climate change.
So they're actors. They're not always the victims.
And they play a unique role in addressing climate change in everyday life.
And that's a very important point, isn't it? I mean, let's remind those who are watching what a climate action project is, and actually what does it look like if it's really delivering for women? Maybe that's a question I can put to you, Mohua.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are so many varieties of climate action projects, but I just think I'll share one anecdote here, which is if you want to do an intervention, this was actually a recent survey carried out in Rajasthan, where somebody came in, sort of an organization similar to yours, came in with the idea of delivering a climate action project that would help women. What they found, because they also fortunately undertook a listening exercise, just like EIB is going to do, they found that actually what women wanted was time saving. They want time more than anything else because they're completely programmed from morning till evening. They were looking for solar-powered devices that would give them time. And in particular, this example, this came out from a survey. The women who, for example, own 5 heads of livestock, they could be goats or cattle, they milk them very early in the morning. Because there's no refrigeration, they have to take the milk to the drop-off point where it's going to be sold before dawn. And they save a little bit of milk for the household. They have to run back and actually churn this thing into ghee and buttermilk, again before sunlight. And what they were saying is, because it gets so hot in the summers, even if their baby is falling out of bed, they can't stop this manual process because otherwise the whole milk will be spoiled. So they were saying, if we had to buy one solar-powered standalone appliance that you guys could help us to buy, please give us a milk churner. That will get the job done. That takes me 3 hours. It'll be done in half an hour.
And can you get a solar-powered milk churner?
You can. You absolutely can. That'll be the
I've
solar
learned
panel. So this
Fascinating.
kind of thing would
Yes.
really give them time. That's what they want.
We've talked a little actually about, in fact not yet here, but we talked earlier, about the fact that there's a difference, isn't there, as to what women living in cities might need in terms of climate action projects or support, and those living in rural areas. So could you give us a sense of what you think a climate action project that delivers for women might look like in cities?
Right. So I'd say one, something that I touched upon earlier, I think we definitely need more projects related to transport, because that not just addresses the problems in terms of more public transport, more walking and cycling infrastructure, but also has effects on the overall fossil fuel based emissions. So it it's like a two-pronged approach where you also address the gender issue and you also address the climate issue. That is one. And then I would say let's have more of renewable energy applications, because again, you're promoting renewable energy applications in the household, give them simple solutions which they can use, and at the same time then you're again saving on your fossil fuel emissions. So I think things like that, energy efficiency basically, I think a lot of these things, so the key elements of climate action are definitely energy efficiency, renewable energy, transport, buildings, and all of this impact women, because I think they are the centerpiece in all of this, either at the workplace or at home.
Can I give an example here,
Absolutely.
Shirin? Continuing where Mohua was talking about women, here I would like to talk about girls. I visited the interior Kasturba Gandhi Vidyalaya in Kushinagar in UP. And there are girls studying 6th to 8th class, residential school, from very poor background, you know. And because they're here, they would like to study, move ahead in life. But the electricity supply there was erratic. So one of the organizations like yours, as Mohua also said, provided them with solar lanterns, you know. Each girl had one solar lantern to herself. And they would charge the battery during the day, and in the evening they would study, you know, with that light available. So that pleasure, you know, so, you know, as with Mohua is involved very heavily with ISA, it talks about big figures, 100 gigawatts of solar energy, 175 gigawatts of renewable energy. For a person like me, that really doesn't matter. For a person like me, what matters is that pleasure for that girl, that energy available. You know, the steps that she can take and move ahead in life is what is important. You know?
And so that's important, isn't it, for organizations like the EIB and other multilateral development banks to understand that it's not always the big projects that have the impact, isn't it, Maria?
Yes.
It's the small drops that make the ocean.
Exactly. And it is very important for us that we listen to these experiences.
Exactly.
And that we incorporate this knowledge into the design of projects. I can also give you an example. It's a different sector. It is roads. We have been analyzing on the roads what is the use of men and women on the road. Mm-hmm. And women use much more the sides of the road, the shoulders of the road, because they would be walking or cycling there. So when the design of the road is being made, you need to make sure that that is wide enough, and also that that is not the part that, because in climate there's the question of adaptation as well. There's mitigation, but also adaptation. That's not the part where all the water of the road goes. because then the women will not be able to walk or use the sides of the road when it rains. So this is another example of something that is important that we finance, that is good for trade, is good for transportation, for economic development, but that we make the project inclusive. Each one of them inclusive.
So you have to apply that gender lens to it. I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, Aparna, and then I want to come to our online audience, who I presume are out there waiting impatiently. And of course, just to remind you out there that you can send your questions in, and we will come to them in a moment and later as well. But Aparna, you mentioned the idea of women as not just victims, not just as beneficiaries either, but as actors in this whole issue. What is it that you think needs to be done in order to enable women to start taking more leadership roles, more active roles in climate action and in projects?
Yeah, I think we need to understand that climate change is a global risk, but the vulnerabilities are felt mostly at the local level. Here the communities, specifically women, have their own ways of building, so they have their own vulnerabilities as well as own ways to adapt to the threats and their own ways to build resilience and come out of climate change, deal with the climate risk. Which is why it is important that we empower and support women or local communities and help make inclusive policy. That's something that Maria was talking about. What we need is not a global understanding of climate risk and then top-down approach in policy. What we need is a bottom-up approach, mainstreaming gender, mainstreaming their experiences, their own community-based adaptation practices, learning from them and integrating them at every level, right from local level to subnational to national, and then talk about it at the international level. I think that will help a project succeed and make it more efficient to deliver.
Because often the solutions are to be found there at the local level.
Yeah, and it's embedded in culture, communities, societies, everywhere.
Yes, right.
Here, can I just inform you that in India, the 73rd and 74th Amendment, from 1993 onwards, we have 33% reservation of women in the rural and the urban local bodies. So we have a lot of women, who have, that position with them. But we really don't see them acting and taking an active role there because they do not have that kind of learnings. The capacity building needs to be done. It's growing, but we really need to take it more. If the kind of capacity building is done, then women take decisions and they are obviously more inclined towards climate.
But let's come back to that in a moment, because I wanted to ask a little about, also to Maria, whether that's something that our types of institutions can do, or whether it should be left actually to national, regional, and as you say, local level. But Pierre, my colleague, is in the audience there, and he's been following the online questions. Pierre, have you got anything for us?
We got a couple of questions, actually. One coming from Twitter for Maria, and it's something you already touched base on, so maybe you can go a little bit more into details, maybe. So the question is, how do you make sure that gender equality is at the heart of any project that the EIB invests in?
Okay.
Do you want to try and answer?
Yes. Every project that we carry out undergoes an evaluation from many points of view. Of course, financial and risk, we are a bank, but we pay a lot of attention to the environmental and the social aspects. Within the social aspects, we look at the respect of human rights, and we look at how the project is affecting women and girls. So this is how we are mainstreaming gender aspects into all of our projects. And therefore, in each one of them, we will be looking at exactly how are the women affected, and we will be asking them. That's another important point. We always do community engagement, and one thing is to talk to the chief of the village, or that tends to be a man, and then what we do is we make sure that we have some opportunity where we can talk to women, and we can talk also to young people, or that we can talk to people that are disabled. And this is integrated in the analysis of the projects every time.
I'll ask you all if you want to contribute to that a little bit more, but Pierre, do we have another question as well?
Yes, we actually do have another question, and that's a more general question for everyone, I guess. It is, how do you want to push the gender equality agenda forward in countries that are dominated by patriarchy?
Okay, so that's already addressed slightly by Maria, absolutely fair point. And actually, whose job is it to do that as well? Coming back to the idea of, is it local level, is it national, is it multinationals, who should be saying that? Suchi, would you want to contribute to that?
Yes, so I just wanted to add to what Maria and Aparna mentioned. Sorry, I got the name wrong.
Aarti.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to that with an anecdote. So we have these decentralized solar microgrid projects that we work on. And in order to make the project sustainable and to actually add the elements of gender equity and other things in that, we create village energy committees. So the village energy committee is then responsible for the upkeep of the plant. So we train an operator, and that operator with a team of young people is responsible for the regular maintenance. And that is how we try and make sure that while we are not there or the vendor is not there, the plant still keeps running. In the village energy committee, what we tried to ensure was to have 50% representation of women. So if it was a committee of 12, there would be 6 women. And also in this particular village that we worked in the Central India landscape, the Eco Development Committee, which is again a village-based committee, that was headed by a woman. But unfortunately, what we saw was when we had these meetings and everybody would come, we had to actually call the women. They wouldn't want to leave their household work and attend the meetings. So we had to go door to door and say, you need to be in the meeting because you are a village energy committee member. And then they would not speak. They would just sit there and the men would be speaking. So I think that is where the awareness and the capacity building, the empowerment comes into place. So we don't just give them a role, but we also make them competent enough to actually come to the forefront.
Here I would like to tell you that, sorry, because of capacity building, in very interior areas, I've seen women repairing hand pumps. So if we give them that kind of capacity building, they can become solar, engineers, who can maintain that, not only, feel shy of speaking, but actually do that. It's the capacity building that makes the difference there.
Mohua?
Yeah, if you'll allow me, I have 2 points. One, to respond to what Maria said. I also was with a large multilateral institution, and I know that we do our listening exercises at the beginning when we are designing the project. So my thought, after many years of leading these projects, is that we must actually not just wait until the midterm review to do another round of asking and listening, but we need to do it consistently during every what we call supervision or implementation support mission. Find out what women think, and for the reasons that have just been mentioned, where women don't speak if their room has a number of men, I think we should have some women-only listening exercises of how the project implementation is going according to the women who are supposed to be benefiting from it. So that would be one concrete suggestion. And then that we also, at the end, when we have the project conclusion, that we have a little table giving quotes, feedback of what women said. So, that was one suggestion.
Maria's taking notes.
I'm taking notes, exactly.
Taking notes.
And that's very much addressing the question from the online viewer there.
I have a question.
How do you actually deal with societies where there is a patriarchy? So you might create the posts, but if they're not coming, how do you deal with that? Aparna, any thoughts on that one?
No, well, I was extending to what Aarti had said, which has already been addressed. I had a similar experience in a very interior village called Korapat. And I was also working in Mewat once. In my observation, I see while, Mewat, which is very, very close to a city like New Delhi, had these women who did not participate, whereas in the interior village of Korapat, a primitive tribal community, women who had 60,000 years of origin were the one who were leading agricultural intervention and other stuff. So it's all matter of capacity that has been built by external agencies like non-governmental organizations, and how they intervene to build the capacity and make it happen. But I have a question now that we don't have any more questions right now. We are talking about gender responsive projects and gender responsive climate action project. I would really want to know, is there a joint understanding of what gender responsive project consists of? Is there a framework that possibly right from investors to us community who are talking about have in hand, where we just create a checklist to see, what do we do when we have a project which is gender responsive?
So
How do we evaluate?
Do we have a common language?
Yeah,
in other words?
how do we evaluate? In the absence of which, I fear that there won't be reliable data available for investors to later check, monitor, evaluate the effectiveness of the project. So,
Okay,
yeah.
there's a question. And I'm going to ask all of you how, and we're going to kind of move towards the end of this Facebook Live, but continue with our physical audience who are in the room here in Delhi. Is there cause for optimism here? Are we arriving, Maria, at a common language when it comes to, for example, the big multilateral lenders on what is a gender project? How do we measure? Because for everything we've all said, unless we can actually work out our success or our failures, we are not going to get anywhere.
Right. Yes. We do have a common language. We all refer to the Sustainable Development Goals that have been established in the context of the United Nations, and there it is not just the heading of Sustainable Development Goal number 5, it is also the indicators underneath, and there is working groups that are going into the taxonomy of each one of these elements. So that exists. There is also, and that's very important because for all of these projects and for climate, we need a lot of finance, and this finance can not only come from the multilaterals, it will never be enough. We need to mobilize the capital markets. And for capital markets, there are the principles for the green bonds, and there are also principles for sustainable bonds that go much more into the social aspects and therefore into the gender aspects. But before we finish, there's one thing I do want to say. You asked, are we all responsible or who has the responsibility? Definitely it's all of us. It is on each one of us to challenge, to ask the questions, to not accept the answers if they are not the right ones, and to keep pushing and creating the environment in which the pioneers, those that are courageous enough to move out of what is expected socially from them and take action, make an investment, create a community that is making a change, we need to be supporting them. And that has to be visible, because what we need is examples. And that's what we need to be doing.
Pierre has another question from an online viewer. Pierre?
I actually have a question for Aarti on Facebook. So the question is, the concept of development in response to climate change means different things for women and for organizations. How do you ensure that your ideas match?
Here I would say that for organizations and for the government, we cannot have a single project. As you were saying that we can have a single project, I feel we need to desegregate for the rural women, for the rural scenario, and for the urban scenario. And once we chalk it down, what is it that is the need of the hour? Like Lucknow Metro project was funded by EIB. That may be a very good solution for a rural and urban women. But for rural women, a different kind of solution exists for the climate change. I have been to villages where I saw infrastructural projects that affected their lifestyle in such a positive way. So for the rural scenario, I feel, whereas for the urban scenario, we have different kind of setup that should be taken up. For the rural scenario, it is basically the capacity building and infrastructural support. And once all the organizations, the government and the organization come together and study it, and through the institutions, the capital is available, that capacity building is available, I think we can provide to all the gender initiatives.
And I think it comes down to listening, doesn't it?
Listening. Absolutely. I'd just like to mention my favorite social enterprise is something called Frontier Markets. And Frontier Markets basically hires women as salespeople for solar and other products, appliances. And they're called Solar Sahelis. And they actually go because they market to women and they sign up orders. And they just do a fantastic job. And as a result of which, these women earn an income that increases their household income by 50% in a year. And Solar Sahelis has now teamed up with my other favorite, Barefoot College, which is something that has lasted for 4 decades. Right. So Barefoot College is now going to give training, because you mentioned the women repairing pumps and feeling empowered. Absolutely. And the capacity building was needed. So Barefoot College is going to give training to these Solar Sahelis. It's all a women-run, women-dominated enterprise. So these things are happening. These are green shoots, but I think that large organizations such as the EIB, the World Bank, and others really need to, as you say, look at these small examples that maybe are sometimes too small to get on the radar of very large organizations. I think we just need to go and look for them and really spend time listening and learning from these cases.
Last word, very briefly, to Suchi.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is also that we need to promote innovation and entrepreneurship amongst women.
Yes.
And also there is a need for innovative business models to be taken up by smaller companies, the SMEs that are providing energy access solutions. For example, there are companies providing improved cook stove solutions and they reach out through the self-help groups.
Right.
So that is empowering the women, making them aware of the benefits and also using them as agents of change to sort of push through improved cook stoves. So I think these models also need to be promoted.
Cook
Yet
stoves
again. But thanks all of you for being in the room. And I don't know whether any of you now have any questions. Yeah,
Yes,
so
please.
tell us your name and where you're from. And fire away.
Hi, my name is Ritika. I am Aparna's colleague at the Observer Research Foundation, and I would like to ask a question. From the conversation that's happened here today, it's been very enlightening, and thank you so much for having such a conversation
Thank
in
you
the
for
first
coming.
place. So the conversation has mostly sort of evolved from a bottoms-up approach, and I think it is equally important that the other side of the communication
Policy.
also happens. So the top-down approach. So if I could actually focus attention and ask if Ms. Mukherjee could actually answer, respond to the question that had been asked originally in the introduction, whether the International Solar Alliance has a gendered approach or has it on the agenda to include a gendered perspective to projects that it's going to be rolling out or the investments that it's going to be encouraging.
Well, thank you so much for this question. The answer is it will have a gendered approach. The International Solar Alliance is having its foundation day, so it doesn't have a track record, fortunately, of having a non-gendered approach. So it will get off on the right footing. And one thing that it makes me very pleased to say is that we are at the beginning stage of exploring, actually, an activity together with the EIB to see how we can bring off-grid appliances on 3 tracks. One will be to improve the quality of life inside the house through fan, fridge, TV, through making them affordable, to be paid for in tiny installments and essentially going beyond lighting. And all of these will run on solar panels, mind you. These are for places that do not have a grid or don't have a grid that works. So that's one thing. The second thing is productive uses. So that was the first track, inside the home. Second one is to increase their income. For example, this butter churning machine, or there are loads of, you can have tailoring, you can have electric roti machines, you can have electric rice hullers that have increased productivity by 100-fold. So this is the productive uses track. And the third track is for the community, which is community streetlights and social service delivery like clinics and schools. Once you put lights and fans in them, the learning level, the attendance, everything just goes up. So these 3 tracks are what we are trying to pursue through making these affordable. And we've just, in the last 24 hours, started talking to the EIB about possibly supporting a little pilot of this. It's not official yet.
You heard it first here.
It's not official yet. But you can better believe that we will be focusing on gender like anything if we do it.
It's quite interesting listening to you because these are highly innovative projects, actually, aren't they? They're not just the sort of idea of, old-fashioned aid development. And I wonder, Maria, that, in the context of the International Solar Alliance and the way in which the organizations, the multilateral development banks work, can we actually also do something to take these sort of innovative ideas that one might come across and actually help replicate them in other parts of the world? So, for example, Africa, where you've just returned. So it isn't just a one-way thing, is it?
Yes, no, of course. What we need, the challenges are very similar, and the solutions can be extrapolated from one region to the other, and what they probably would need is venture capital as well.
Yes.
So it is, they need financial support, they need technical assistance, and they are going to need equity. We have a number of funds, particularly in Africa, not in Asia for the moment, where what we are doing is supporting innovative solutions that don't need to be high-tech solutions. It's just an innovative way of solving their own problems, and that are very often coming from women that have been studying and that decide to use all that knowledge that they have for solving problems in their own communities. This we are supporting, and I'll be very pleased. We are already associated with in the International Solar Alliance, so I'll be really pleased to work together with you on this.
See, we're already forging partnerships as we speak.
I have a question for Maria. Startup culture is really ill in India. But when we see there are very few women entrepreneurs who are there, there are a few who are involved in environmental sustainability and bringing up projects. But what they require is that kind of, capital and that kind of mentorship. So is EIB looking into it? Because for a girl, when she sees a woman do well, her mother do well, or anyone in the family do well, she also aspires to move ahead and do something in life. So that is another way of ensuring environmental sustainability.
Yes.
Is EIB looking into something like that?
Yes, we are. We are in two ways. One is providing technical assistance to banks so that they feel comfortable lending to women, because that is one of the issues that we see in general. It is the majority of the loans go to men-owned or men-managed companies and not to women-owned or women-managed. So technical assistance to make them understand that in fact, and this is shown by all the analysis and all the data, that women-owned companies tend to be less risky than those owned by men. Because women will be careful. They look at the community. They are not just looking for the quick profit. So that is one element. The second one is making sure that there is the liquidity, therefore the funds for women-owned companies. And there we are extending lines of credit that are specifically for companies that have either a majority of women in decision-making positions or a majority of women in the shareholding.
That's really nice to hear.
And that is also one of the ways in which you make change.
And is EIB also looking into institutional financing where we can, work for the rural women for infrastructural development or capacity building? Is the thought there as yet?
Yes, that would very often be done through microfinance institutions. And we have lines with microfinance institutions.
We have a question at the back there. We'll give you a microphone so we can hear what you're saying.
Hi, my name is Aparna. I'm from PR Movement India, which is a B2B communications magazine. My question is that in the last 1 year, we've seen substantial change in perceptions towards gender inclusion after the Me Too and Time's Up campaigns. Does EIB think that this is a tipping point which you can really push gender inclusion for really improving things across the board when it comes to projects like entrepreneurship, as the lady mentioned? And also the government of India has a substantial pro-women policy, which includes things like cleaner cooking options and even other projects. So do you think we've really reached the tipping point in communicating how gender inclusion can really happen and make and help economic growth?
I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to also ask others, not just the EIB, to answer that question. But I think it's an important one. Is there a momentum, do you think? Let me ask you, Suchi and Aparna, briefly. Is there a momentum created by the Me Too movement and everything that's going on, which is obviously about much more than that particular incident in Hollywood or whatever, that we need to kind of ride? And actually, do you see a shift in the way things are going in terms of where gender is on the radar?
You want to go ahead?
Well, definitely Me Too campaign has helped in raising awareness about women issues and their experiences, and sort of help the women debate move forward. But I think there are still structural challenges and cultural norms in developing societies that still exist that hinder women's progress in a number of ways. I mean, we are sitting here, we have our capacity, we belong to cities, we have made something, we have achieved, we are sitting here together and talking about women. Imagine those women on behalf of whom we are holding this debate. There's still a larger number of women who have still not moved forward, which we are still talking about addressing. So so my answer would be more of yes and no.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, coming back to your point earlier, that we can talk about the bottom up, but actually there is a need at certain levels of policy to introduce whatever it is. And I mean, you know that you mentioned Bangalore, where they have got this policy from the state government to have 30% of women working on whatever project, whatever part of the operation is. Do you think that's the sort of thing we need to see more of?
Absolutely, and a lot is actually happening. So from our experience of working with cities, we know that a number of cities have ladies as mayors, and some of the most active cities are those where the women are leading. Like I can give examples, and I'll take names here. So there's the city of Kochi where the mayor is very active. We were working very closely, even in Bangalore when we interacted with the mayor. I think she's very active, she's into a lot of things. Even if she does not understand things herself, she wants to know and she wants to get engaged in a lot of things. So I think this is definitely happening. Women are realizing that they definitely have a place in leadership and they can really take things forward. And there's definitely a very good momentum happening.
And do you think, Maria, that momentum has kind of translated itself into an institution like the EIB?
I do think it has, and I also see, and I see it in many continents. There is now a generation of women that are very well trained and that are not accepting the ways of the past and are taking their space in society, in companies, and in academia, in each one of the areas of activity. So I do see a very bright future, and it is one which is very integrative. So it is just adding, because just imagine if to development you can add the other half of the population. You know, right. This planet will take off, and that's what we need to be doing. It's adding.
Here
Absolutely.
I would like to add on something.
Can I just take a question from the audience first, and then we'll come back, because you may want to answer it.
I am Rakshi, I'm from Delhi University. So I have two questions actually. The first question being that right now we're talking about empowerment of women and how we can develop them. So why isn't EIB considering partnering with the government of India for Skill India? Because you have so many organizations such as Amazon and so many other e-commerce organizations that have entered in India. They're partnering with the government of India for Skill India, where they're training men and women to perform a lot of jobs which allow them to, become self-sustainable so that they can earn their own, money and their livelihood. So why are you guys considering that? Like, is that an option for capacity building, as you all have mentioned?
Okay. I'll be happy to consider it. I had not considered it, but now you've given me the idea. So we'll discuss about this later. Yes.
Okay, okay. So, Aarti, and then I think we'll wrap it up and head for the
I just wanted to add on where Aparna was saying that there are certain women who still are not being considered and who really need that fillip. And here Maria was saying that women are doing great, which we all agree. So I'm working as a senior consultant with the Election Commission of India, and there we have this motto, every vote counts. So I think our motto should be every woman counts, So I mean, we should move ahead with that, Everyone counts. So let's take everyone in consideration and take everyone ahead,
I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I want to say thanks very much, all of you, and do stay in touch with us. Those of you, some of you will stay in touch with us anyway. And thanks all of you again very much for participating, and we look forward to working with you actually. In different ways and carrying on our conversation, which I think has just started today. So thank you very much. Thanks all of you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.